Yeah, it's funny how Scandinavia has just really emerged, and it was in a short period of time. I think, I can't give him enough credit, but I think Alexander Gustafsson really started that. But now you have, fighters coming in from Norway, Mr. Finland, Denmark, a little slower. We love going to new countries, and a brand new arena just opened in Copenhagen. So the thought was, hey, should we go there and open that arena? We couldn't kind of work it out in time with they were going through their opening process, and we hadn't been to Stockholm since the Gus and Rumble fight. So, from a matchmaking perspective, it lined up perfectly with him wanting to fight and being available to fight. We just knew we were going to be successful there, and we have a great broadcast relationship with Viasat there. We're in a long-term deal, and they're obviously eager to support it, and it does a lot for their business. I guess just in general, when you think about our events, there's no better marketing tool than bringing a fight week to a market. Like, just the amount of earned media and PR and buzz you get, you can't even replicate that. You can't even spend your way out of that, right? So we think of it as our biggest marketing asset. So that's kind of strategically how we decide where we're going. It's kind of like, okay, where are we going to make this investment? Because they are investments for us. They're expensive. The events are expensive, and there's a finite supply. So you have to be very, diligent about where we're going. And Stockholm's always been good to us, and it's just the right time to go back. Yeah, undoubtedly, especially when you look at the talent and the champions that we have coming out of there. And I think a lot of it has to do with us actually making that commitment a few years ago to start bringing events. We used to, maybe we go to the UK once a year, and we did one event in Scandinavia, and it was very inconsistent. And we decided, hey, we're going to plant our flag in Europe and do 5 or 6 events a year and really try to grow this sport and the business at the grassroots level. And I think what it does as well is, if you're doing 5 to 6 events a year there, it forces the matchmakers and the scouts to actually find local talent, right? Because you have to sell. So I think it's completely opened our eyes from a talent perspective to signing people from these different markets. We have people from all over Scandinavia, Poland, Germany now. Even France is coming up. We haven't had an event there, but we have French talent, and obviously the UK has exploded, UK and Ireland. So it's definitely, I think there were some critics a few years ago that, we're expanding too quickly and it's diluting the brand, but I think the returns are there when you see it from a talent perspective and what we've been able to do on the TV side and the sponsorship side. And I think broadcast distribution is a big piece of it too. We've been able to have meaningful deals with some of these partners in these regions, whether it's Viasat, whether it's ProSieben in Germany. Obviously BT relationship's been strong over the last few years and consistent. That's the other thing. Our broadcast was inconsistent in the UK for a number of years. We were just bouncing around, and now we've had that runway with BT, at least, where people have gotten used to. Consumers are conditioned to find our content there. Well, they created an observatory. I think it was maybe the beginning of the year, and with the ultimate goal of figuring out, okay, what is the best way to regulate MMA in France? It's a federation model, every sport there. For the sport to even be allowed on television and formally recognized, you have to have an amateur federation. Good news is we do have an amateur MMA federation in France as part of our IMMAF umbrella. So it's how do you go about that process of putting the rules and structure in place to get that formally recognized? Does it become an independent federation? Do you go in under a different combat sport, whether it's wrestling or judo, whatever it is? And that's the process we're going through now. The content's already on air. We have a TV deal, and it's just about getting the politicians comfortable that, hey, we have the proper rules. It's an education process too, though, because I think the market's just that far behind where people think it's still kind of a lawless sport, and they don't realize between the USADA drug testing and all the other work that we're doing in the unified rules. It's just more of an education process. I was over there 2 months ago and met with a number of the politicians and the different stakeholders, and you'd be shocked at how little people know about it. And once they understand the scale of the business and even the commercial opportunities that it could bring in the participation, because the reality is that all of the people training in France and all these other disciplines are starting to migrate and train in MMA as well, and you have a lot of people that are crossing over. So the talent base is already there, the appetite and the demand is there. We're looking at doing UFC gyms as well, and now with Francis, Tom Duquesnoy, obviously, as his profile continues to increase, especially being a native Parisian, I think we're going to see, a lot of momentum over there. So it's too early to put a timeline on it, but I'd love to say that, we'd be recognized in the next 12 to 18 months, and maybe, end of 18 for an event, beginning of 19. That's our hope. I mean, can we accelerate it? I hope we can accelerate it, but if not, I think that's probably a reasonable timeline. Yeah, I think there'll be some cities that will become kind of tentpole events. I think London's probably the best example. That's the one market that I think we commit to every year. If you've noticed, there's been kind of a February-March event the last few years. We already have the March date next year, whether I should announce that or not, but we have the March date locked in because the O2 is the busiest arena in the world, so you have to get your dates early, right? So we're going to lock in London every year. Stockholm's been consistent, but not every year. But the challenge is, the balance for us is that we have other markets we want to grow outside of Europe as well, right? So do I think that we could do 7, 8, 9 events a year and have the demand to do so? 100%. But at the end of the day, we don't want to have our overall calendar go from 40 to 50 events overnight, right? Because you're worried about, talent in dilution, and we always want to make sure that every card we put on is UFC caliber and UFC quality. So it's tough to expand Europe by 3 events a year, because where do you take that from, right? Do you reduce your events further in Brazil? Do you take Asia events? Do you reduce Australia from 2 to 1? So that's the balance. So I think we've hit like a pretty good rhythm with the 5 or 6, and we've been able to balance going back to kind of our core markets, but also expand into new markets. And I think next year is a perfect example where, looking at the calendar early, we'll probably be back to 3 markets we've been, but then the final 2 events, we're taking a hard look at, like a Moscow, and potentially going back to the Middle East as well, and not necessarily Abu Dhabi. There's other markets there, and there's interest. So it's definitely a balance, and sometimes it feels like you're just trying to, it's almost like portfolio allocation to an extent, but there's no shortage of opportunity.